On his first day in office, President Joe Biden announced that he was going to send a bill to Congress to address a pathway to citizenship for the millions of undocumented aliens who are present in the United States. This will be the first serious attempt at immigration reform in about 7 years. What I would like to talk about today is the misinformation that's out there, what is currently in the proposal that's being floated about, and what are the political realities? What are the chances that we are going to get meaningful immigration reform out of Congress? My name is William Kovatch, and I am a trained immigration lawyer. I've often been disappointed in the way immigration issues are talked about in the media, although it's not always their fault. Immigration law can be a very complex subject, touching upon constitutional issues as well as personal political points of view. My goal is to explain immigration law to you, concentrating on looking at judicial opinions and executive actions in order to explain how immigration law can have an impact on our community and on our country. I hope that you'll join me as we try to make sense of immigration law and how it may affect the average person. Let's start with talking about the misinformation that's out there. On the day of Biden's inauguration, there were tons of YouTube videos as well as articles that were announcing that Joe Biden had introduced into the Senate a bill to address a pathway to citizenship. Well, here's the problem. That wasn't entirely true. To begin with, Joe Biden, as the President of the United States, has no power to introduce anything into Congress. He's not a legislature. He is part of the executive branch. His job is to execute and enforce the laws. It's the job of Congress to write the laws. The only people who can introduce a bill to Congress are duly elected members of Congress. The president can't do it alone. Now, some may argue that this is a matter of semantics, that all the president really needs is to have somebody from his party who's in the Senate who will introduce the bill for him. And yeah, that is true. In fact, Senator Bob Menendez from New Jersey has already committed to introducing the bill once Joe Biden is ready for it. But the distinction is very significant. And that's because our Constitution is based on the principle that we need to break power up. That if we concentrate too much power in one branch of government, that creates the possibility of tyranny, the possibility that freedoms and liberty will be infringed. And so the president does not have the power to introduce bills to Congress. He must rely on somebody within Congress to actually introduce the bill. Now, the second piece of misinformation, as of the date that I am recording this video, the bill doesn't exist. There's been no bill introduced into the Senate that addresses immigration reform, at least as of yet. Now, by the time I release this, if there is a bill out there, by all means, let me know in the comments below. I'd like to see it. But I've checked the Senate website, I've checked the House website, I've checked other government watchdog websites. There just is no bill currently in the Senate that's been introduced to address a pathway to citizenship. But what we do have is an announcement from the White House itself. That announcement is posted on the White House webpage. We'll have a link to that in the description below. And in that announcement, it sets forth what President Biden would like to see in immigration legislation. And of course, it's very useful to look at this announcement and see, well, what is it that's on Joe Biden's agenda? What is it that the Democrats are going to be fighting for? In fact, let's go over now the substance of what the proposal contains. So let's talk about Joe Biden's proposed pathway to citizenship. It's important to note here that there is no bill as of the time of this recording. There's no bill in the Senate. We only have the proposal as it exists on the announcement on the White House webpage. So all this analysis is coming solely from the White House webpage. And that's important for two reasons. First of all, we need to understand this announcement as the opening proposal in the negotiations. Remember that with the current makeup of the Senate, pushing through this legislation in the form that it is first introduced is not very likely. It is more likely that there will need to be some kind of compromise in order to appease conservative Democrats and maybe even bring along a few Republicans. And second, because this is a proposal and not an actual bill, there are some aspects of the proposal that are not very well detailed. In some respects, this proposal raises more questions than it answers. Now, with all that in mind, let's take a look at what President Biden is proposing. First, we have an 8-year roadmap for those who are currently present in the United States without legal authorization to earn citizenship. Undocumented aliens can apply for a temporary legal status, a temporary status to allow them to remain in the country. 5 years afterwards, they may apply for permanent residency. Presumably, this is if they qualify for permanent residency based on one of the pre-existing visa types that are already available. And finally, it looks like there's an expedited wait for citizenship. Normally, a permanent resident must be present in the United States for 5 years before applying for citizenship. Under this proposal, it looks like that is being cut to 3 years. This is more in line with those aliens who are married to U.S. citizens. A spouse of a U.S. citizen, for example, only has to wait 3 years from the time that they're granted permanent residency to the time that they can apply for citizenship. So it looks like the same thing is going to apply for those who go through this roadmap. And here it's important to look at the qualifications, because not all aliens who are present in the United States illegally are going to qualify for the program. First of all, there is a physical presence requirement. To qualify, an alien must have been present in the United States as of January 1st, 2021. The physical presence requirement is absolutely necessary. Without such a deadline, when you make a proposal like this, you risk a rush to the border. So in order to prevent people trying to rush to the border to sneak across and get into the United States as quickly as possible, you make sure that there's a date that they must have been present in the United States by, and that that date is sometime in the past. Here, the date is just before President Biden assumed office. Next, the alien must pass a background check. Presumably, this is going to be a check to look into whether the alien has a criminal background or whether the alien poses a threat to national security. And then finally, Joe Biden proposes that all aliens who go through this program must pay their taxes. Now, this really isn't that big of a deal, because many aliens who are working in the United States, even without proper documentation, are paying their taxes. They're doing so either by getting a tax ID number from the IRS, or in some instances, they're using a dummy social security number. And while some people will claim, well, that's identity theft, well, not really, because these aliens, when they're using this dummy social security number, they really don't expect to get any benefit or any money from using that social security number, except for the ability to pay their payroll taxes. Now let's consider some criminal background issues. What's important to understand here is that when you look at the law of immigration as it currently exists, there's the law of deportability. That's the law that kicks people out of the country who are already here legally. And then there's the law of inadmissibility. This is the law that applies to keep people out of the country or to remove people from the country who did not enter with a proper visa. The criminal provisions of the law of deportability and inadmissibility are already complicated. For one thing, the Immigration and Nationality Act creates categories of crimes such as aggravated felonies and crimes involving moral turpitude. And these categories of crimes, they're very strictly defined. Their definitions don't necessarily match up with state law crimes. So you can have a crime, for example, that is a misdemeanor under state law, and it still may qualify as an aggravated felony under U.S. immigration law. One of the interesting consequences of the way the law is currently written is that driving under the influence, drunk driving, is not a crime that you can be removed for, at least the first time you're convicted for a DUI. It's not a crime that you can be removed for. And there are a lot of people out there who think that that's absolutely ridiculous, that you shouldn't be able to get away with drunk driving and still be able to stay in the country. And so, over the last decade or so, different immigration programs that have come into existence have had their own criminal provisions. So not only as a practitioner did you need to know the law of inadmissibility and deportability, you also had to know the specific criminal provisions of the program that you're looking at. DACA, for example, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. That program has a very specific set of requirements with respect to criminal background. For example, not only does the law of deportability and inadmissibility apply, but also there's a limit on the number of state law misdemeanors that a person can be convicted of in order to qualify for DACA. I think the number, for example, is 3. So if you have 3 misdemeanor DUI convictions, you won't qualify under DACA even if you're not inadmissible or removable under normal U.S. immigration law. So because of this trend, I would highly suspect that towards the end, once we have a final bill, if we have a final bill, that we're going to see criminal law provisions that differ and are somewhat stricter than the law of deportability and inadmissibility. Next, something that's very important and likely will be very controversial, and that is that this pathway to citizenship is going to be open to deportees. Now that's important because if you think about it, in the last 4 years, people have been removed from the United States who may not necessarily have a criminal background. Remember that President Trump changed the enforcement priorities. So now everybody who was present in the United States illegally was part of that enforcement priority, and they could have been removed even if they had absolutely no criminal history. So for humanitarian purposes, it seems that Joe Biden wants to correct that. And if you look, this applies to people who were deported on or after January 20th, 2017. That date is significant because that is the date that Trump assumed office. So that is the date that we're going to take as the day that the enforcement priorities change. If that person's already been deported, well, then you don't need to be present on January 1st, 2021. Obviously, you won't be. You'll be in your own country. But the alien will still need to meet a physical presence requirement. They must have been physically present in the United States for 3 years prior to their removal. And then finally, the requirement here is that this form of relief is not going to be open to everybody who's been deported. It will only be done for family unity or humanitarian purposes. And again, this is one of those areas where the proposal doesn't go into detail of what that means. So we can only speculate or make an educated guess, but still it gives an idea of what Joe Biden is thinking with regard to this proposal. And now let's talk a little bit about the family unity provisions of the proposal. First, Joe Biden proposes to clear up the backlogs. This is, again, an area where there's not a lot of detail in what he means by that. It could be addressing the backlogs that have existed in the consulates and the embassies that were caused by the delays imposed by the Trump administration. Maybe we're talking about the backlogs that exist because some people are waiting once they qualify for a visa. Sometimes you're waiting up to 20 years for a visa to become available. The thing is, the reason people are waiting 10, 20 years for their visa to become available, well, that's not a function of a problem with the administration. That's a function of the problem with the law. That's because we have something called the preference system. Under the preference system, only 480,000 aliens are allowed to immigrate based on family ties every year. And so those visas are divided up based on the degree of relationship to the person filing the petition, as well as the area of the world where the alien is coming from. So people who are waiting the longest are brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens who are from Mexico. Those people are waiting in excess of 22 years for a visa to become available. And the only way to clear up that backlog is to change the law, to change the preference system and make more visas available every year. I'm not sure if that's what Joe Biden has in mind here, but again, this is where the proposal is not very detailed. There is talk here about recapturing unused visas. Now, what do we mean by that? As I said, there are 480,000 visas available every year. So the State Department, when those visas become available, they have to distribute them. They distribute them by looking at the waiting list. How many petitions have been filed that involve every category of family visa, and that involve different areas of the world. And they distribute them. How many do we expect from this area of the world to apply for a visa this year? That's how they distribute them. Well, every year, it turns out that fewer visas are distributed than are legally available. It may not be a huge amount, it may only be a few thousand, but it still happens every year because the State Department can't account for everything that's happened in, say, 20 years. People die. People decide they don't want to come to the United States. People may not get notice at first, and it may take them a while before they realize they can actually pick up their visa. So Biden proposes recapturing these visas that are otherwise lost. How he plans to do that, again, that's a mystery. It's not detailed in the proposal. Biden also proposes eliminating the 3-year and the 10-year bars. What are the 3-year and the 10-year bars? Well, if you're illegally present in the United States, depending on how much time you have been illegally present, the moment you step out of the United States, you get hit with a bar upon returning. So if you've been illegally present in the United States for 6 months, the moment you step outside the United States, a 3-year bar hits you. Let's say that you've been illegally present for a year or more. Again, the moment you step outside of the United States, a 10-year bar on returning to the United States hits you. The 3-year and 10-year bar really do hit family visas the hardest. Let's say you have a young man who's come in from Central America. Let's say he comes to the United States, he marries a U.S. citizen, they have a child together, the child's a U.S. citizen, and at some point they want to apply for a visa for this young man. Well, as it turns out, you can get a visa for him. As a spouse of a U.S. citizen, you can get a visa. And under most circumstances, you can even waive all that physical presence, all that illegal physical presence. However, that person can't adjust to status. That means they can't get their visa while they're still in the United States. Instead, the law requires them to go overseas and apply for the visa at the consulate or the embassy. Consular processing is what that's called. Well, the way U.S. law works, if that young man from Central America marries a U.S. citizen, gets an approved visa petition based on his marriage to a U.S. citizen, now he needs to leave to go to his consulate in Central America to get processed. The moment he goes outside the country, he can't come back for either 3 years or 10 years. Most likely 10 years if they have a child together, because most likely he's been in the country for more than a year. Now, you can apply for a waiver of the 3-year or the 10-year bar, but there's no guarantee that you'll get it. There's a way you can apply for the waiver, get a provisional waiver before you leave the United States. But again, this isn't a very stable or efficient way to deal with this situation. So Joe Biden proposes eliminating the 3-year and the 10-year bar altogether. And then finally, we have the proposal that aliens who have approved visa petitions may wait in the United States for their visa to become available and don't have to leave for consular processing. So again, let's take the example of a young man from Central America, sneaks across the border, comes to the United States, marries a U.S. citizen, has a U.S. citizen child, applies for a visa, gets the visa petition approved, and again, that person has to leave the country in order to actually get their visa. They have to do consular processing. Well, in some Central America countries, like the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, that's a very dangerous prospect. That's because the person would be returning to an area that's very likely controlled by illicit gangs. And they may need to wait in their home country in Central America for several weeks before the visa actually becomes available, before they have their visa interview. Well, that's several weeks that they have to be without their family. So it seems that what President Biden is proposing is to eliminate that, to allow a person who has an approved family visa petition to wait and to then process in the United States when that visa becomes available, rather than to go back to their home consulate. This could have the biggest effect on brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens. Consider, for example, if you have a brother or sister who is from Mexico, but they snuck across the border. Being a good brother or sister, you're a U.S. citizen, you file a petition for them, well, they still have to wait 20 years before the visa becomes available. And as I said, they've still got to worry about the 3-year or 10-year bar. Well, it looks like that under the Biden proposal, they could wait out that 20 years waiting for a visa in the United States without leaving and going back to Mexico. That's a huge benefit for brothers and sisters of U.S. citizens based on current U.S. law. And now let's talk about the LGBTQ provisions. Joe Biden says that he wants to have the law recognize permanent partnerships. Now, at first blush, you may say, well, wait a minute. Doesn't U.S. law already recognize same-sex marriages? And yes, that's true. If you're from another country and you have a same-sex marriage that was recognized in your home country, that same-sex marriage will be recognized in the United States. Likewise, if you're a U.S. citizen and you marry somebody who is the same gender as yourself, but they're from a foreign country, well, that's not going to matter when you apply for the visa. That person will still qualify for a spousal visa. But the United States is somewhat progressive with respect to same-sex marriages. That's not true for most of the world. Think about it. If a homosexual couple comes from a country where there are strict anti-homosexual laws, this could be in Africa, this could be in parts of Asia, this could be in Russia. Well, maybe their home country doesn't recognize same-sex marriages, but let's say that they are permanently committed to each other. Well, currently, there's no way for that couple to receive benefits under the family visa provisions of U.S. immigration law. That's because family law is based on the idea of marriage. If you can't get legally married, you're out of luck. Now, you could come to the United States and try to get married in one of the United States and go about it that way, but that's not practical for everybody. So it seems like what Joe Biden wants to do is to loosen up the rules and to allow same-sex couples who may not be married and may not be allowed to marry under their home country's laws to give them the same benefits as same-sex married couples. Let's also talk about the provisions that deal with fighting discrimination. First of all, we have the No Ban Act. This is an act that's pending in Congress right now. The idea is to counteract what President Trump was able to do with his Muslim travel ban. If you recall, President Trump was able to impose this travel ban. It affected mostly people from Muslim countries. And when the case was brought to the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Court basically said, yes, the president has broad discretion before somebody comes to the border to exclude somebody that he believes is a danger, is a threat to national security. So he could exclude somebody based on religion, and it can be discriminatory. It doesn't matter. That is all part of the president's foreign policy powers. Well, the No Ban Act tries to address that. It tries to restrict the ability of the president to impose bans of people coming into the United States where that ban could be based on religion or nationality or gender. These proposals also expand the number of diversity visas that are available every year. Now, what is a diversity visa? This is also known as the visa lottery. The idea is that the United States tries to equal out where all the immigrants come from in the different parts of the world. So a lot of immigrants come from Mexico or the Philippines or China or India. And because of that, those areas, they don't have any visas available under the diversity visa program. Rather, areas of the world like Europe, Northern Africa, Nepal, these areas are more likely going to have diversity visas available. Now, there are a whole bunch of requirements. It's not at all what President Trump portrayed it as on the campaign trail. It's not countries sending us people who aren't their best and brightest. The people who apply for these visas, they apply for them themselves. The host country, the home country, has absolutely nothing to do with who applies for a diversity visa. Plus, there's a minimum education level that applies. A person cannot get a diversity visa if they don't have the equivalent of a high school diploma or if they don't have a profession that requires the equivalent of a high school diploma. What's interesting here is on the Republican agenda, they want to do away with diversity visas. They want to replace it with more of a point system like that Canada has in place. The idea being that the more valuable the person is to American society, maybe because of education, the type of job they have, maybe because of family ties, they get more points, and the more points you get, the more likely you are to get a visa. U.S. law doesn't work that way. Canadian law works that way. I believe Australian law works that way. And Republicans want to change U.S. law to work that way. And one of the ways they want to do it is by eliminating the diversity visas. So by putting this out there, I'm not sure we're going to end up with an expanded number of diversity visas available, quite frankly. I think this is a negotiation tool. I think this is an opening bargaining position, something that the Democrats could throw away at some point when they get to a point in the negotiations where it looks like they need to compromise in order to get the bill to pass. Now let's talk about border security. This is going to be an area that the Republicans are going to be very much interested in. First of all, Joe Biden proposes a greater investment in smart technology. Scanning technology, for example, where somebody comes into an airport and they can be scanned and certain contraband, such as narcotics, can be recognized easier. We're also talking about an enhanced infrastructure at the ports of entry. What this is talking about here, right now, when somebody comes to a port of entry along the Mexican border, for example, and let's say they want to apply for asylum. Currently, Customs and Border Patrol is telling those people, we can only process a certain number of asylum applicants every day. So you're going to have to wait outside the country. This is called the MPP, the Migrant Protection Program, or the Remain in Mexico program. It was implemented by the Trump administration. Its legality is, well, it's illegal. There's no legal authority for it. The United States does it anyway. So what Joe Biden seems to be proposing here is expanding the infrastructures, making it so that more people can be processed inside the ports of entry, so we don't have to say to them, we can only process this number of people today, you have to wait outside the United States. It is also meant to do more screening, do more searches, to make sure that the people who are coming in and applying for, say, asylum aren't carrying contraband, aren't carrying drugs on them, or aren't carrying illegal weapons on them. And then there's more area within the port, more facilities to do those types of searches. The border security provisions of Biden's proposal does not seem to include an increased number of border guards, nor does it seem to include more spending on the border wall. And these, again, are areas that the Republicans are going to be very keen on. This may be an area where the Democrats are going to have to compromise. They're going to have to agree to maybe a certain number of new border guards, or maybe agreeing to a certain number of miles of new border wall in order for the rest of the bill to pass. Right? So yes, as Republicans, we will agree to your pathway to citizenship, but in order to do that, we want to see a greater investment in security. That's likely what's going to happen when it comes to bringing Republicans on board for the proposal. What is that final bill going to look like? Well, let's be honest, at this point, that's anyone's guess. And whether immigration reform can even pass Congress, given the makeup of the Senate, that's still in doubt, but we still have hope, and while we have hope, the best advice that anyone can give is simply to watch the political process. Watch how the negotiations evolve in Congress, and in particular, look to the Senate. How will this unfold in the Senate? So I will continue to try to give you updates as I see the negotiations progress in the Senate, and until then, thank you very much for watching.
Thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. If there are any topics you would like me to address in the future, please let me know in the comments below. Now, I don't like talking about this, but I am currently disabled because of complications following cancer surgery. If you're feeling generous,
I'll have a link to my PayPal account
in the description below. Thank you.